When I was looking at this theme, I thought that if you go back and remind yourself of all the times you've moved in your life, and you just told the story of each of those moves, you could really get a pretty good outline of your life that way. So in trying to look back at my own life that way, I naturally went back to the first move I could remember. I would say that it was the first move I ever experienced, but I started telling the story to my sister, and she corrected me, and she said, no, we moved once before then, but you were too young to remember it. So the first one I can remember happened when I was 4 years old. And I've mentioned this here before, but I grew up in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, which is the county seat of Greene County, which is the farthest southwest corner of Pennsylvania. And I grew up there until I left for college. So this move was within Waynesburg. We moved from one house to another, but it was fairly momentous for a reason I'll soon describe. My grandfather Reed, my dad's father, was a construction contractor. And so he had built a beautiful brick house for his wife and family in the middle of Waynesburg, right on the main street and very close to the center of town. And it was a beautiful house, and their family grew up there. And then as his kids reached adulthood, he and his wife wanted to keep the family close together. So they rented or bought houses within a block of their house and gave them to each child as they moved out or got married or whatever circumstance. And so I grew up for the first 4 years of my life on a block where I had 3 sets of aunts and uncles. I had my grandfather. Unfortunately, my grandmother had died young, but my grandfather was still living there. I had 3 sets of aunts and uncles, and I had 11 cousins, all living within one block. And so it was kind of an idyllic experience, although I didn't know it at the time. So what happened was when I was 4 years old, my grandfather died. And so they had to give up his house, and the other houses around that all the aunts and uncles lived in, they started to disperse as well. And they moved to different jobs in different towns, some of them. My dad stayed in town, but he moved us to another house in town about 2 miles away, just on the eastern part of the town. But as I said, only about 2 miles away. So the day of that move when I was 4 years old, I remember not very much, but I remember one episode very clearly. My two closest cousins, who were 6 years old and 5 years old, and I was 4, we were sitting in the front yard of our house watching the movers, and they arrived in one of those long moving vans and were carrying everything piece by piece out of our house into this van. And we were fascinated with watching them because they were 3 very big, burly guys wearing sleeveless t-shirts, and it was summertime, very hot. And after they did that for a while, one of them tossed a quarter to us and said, why don't you boys run up to the restaurant and get us some Cokes? And there was a restaurant up on the corner about a half a block away. So we ran up there and we bought those little bottles of Coke that you used to see that were about 6 ounces. And we brought back as many of those as we could buy with a quarter, which was probably about 5 of them. And when we brought them back, we handed them, but we said, we don't have a bottle opener. They said, that's okay, it's not necessary. One guy takes the bottle, sticks it in his mouth, and popped the top off with his teeth. And then the other guys proceeded to do the same thing, and we were in awe. We thought that was great. So we went back several times and got a lot more Cokes to watch them bite the tops off of the bottles. And that's really the only thing I remember about the move itself. But the other thing about moves is it has an effect on your life, because the new place, there are different things that you didn't deal with before. And in this case, the biggest thing I remember is that my dad said, we're going to have to decide whether we keep going to the same barber shop or are we going to go to the barber shop that's closer to our new house. The guy we had gone to before was a guy named Vic, and the new barber closer to our new house, his name was Ralph's barber shop. And my dad said, which one do you want to go to? I said, I want to keep going back to Vic, because every time he gives me a haircut, he gives me a Dum Dum lollipop from the drawer in his cabinet, and I get to choose what flavor of lollipop I want. So my dad said, well, let's try Ralph's once, just see about that. Maybe he has something like that too. So we go to Ralph's, fine haircut, crew cut, of course, but Ralph has no lollipops. So after we came out, my dad said, where do you want to go next time? I said, I'm going back to Vic's with the lollipops. He said, okay. When it got time for the next haircut, he said, let's go back to Ralph's one more time. I told him about your issue with the lollipops, and he said he might have something for you this time. So I went. When we got done with the haircut, Ralph opened the drawer in his cabinet, and he had taken the nuclear option. He had Tootsie Pops. And I was a lifelong customer at Ralph's after that, and that was probably the biggest effect of the move. Thanks.